so. That said, I think what the key thing in this section is actually most of you will already know these types of designs, but I think we've overlooked them as a key tool for our work. So here's my running experimental example. We have the scarcity mindset again. As people are right at a time they do not have enough money, and we measure prejudice towards multiple outgroups. And so in this kind of study, typically what we would do is we would randomly assign one half of the participants to the scarcity mindset, and one half of the participants to, well, in this time they felt abundance, so the opposite of scarcity. But there are actually other ways that we could design this study, even using these same experimental manipulations. So one, and this is the typical, this is what I was taught on the best way to do this kind of study. This is what you see a lot in the literature. The between-person experiment, sometimes called a post-only design. And here we have a sample. We randomly assign them to a treatment or a control condition, or two like opposite treatment conditions. And then we measure the outcome variable afterwards. So this is a between-person experiment. Super, super common. People use these all the time. I use them all the time. This is what I was really kind of taught as like the core type of experimental method. We could do the same sort of thing. We have our sample. We could measure our outcome measure first. We could then randomly assign people to the treatment or control condition. And then we could measure our outcome measure again. So this is a pre-post design. And this I was also taught when I was in research methods class. But then there's always this big caveat on if you measure this first, then nobody will move on this because they're worried about being consistent with that first one. And so then I almost never use them. Another variation on the pre-post design, especially if you're worried about these consistency effects, is called the quasi-pre-post design. Same idea, but instead of the outcome measure first, you measure something close to the outcome measure. So maybe there's other ways of measuring prejudice. In our example, we could measure something like that first. It just has to be something that's pretty correlated with your outcome measure. Then you randomly assign people to treatment and control, then you can send them to the outcome measure. Or we could do a within-person experiment. This kind of, there's more arrows and boxes here. So you randomly assign people to the control or the treatment condition. They complete the outcome measure. Then you flip which one they're randomly assigned to, and then they complete the outcome measure again. Also fine. Now, this one I also was taught about, and I was like, and people could use this, but they kind of acted like this is like a rare thing that isn't used very often. Although it's often used in cognitive psych. In social psych, we were just weird, I guess. So these are all different types of experiments. They all want to identify the causal effect of the treatment or the experimental condition on the outcome. They just differ in how often they measure this outcome, basically. And the key difference is that measuring the outcome before the experimental conditions. This takes time, but depending on the study, it can be relatively brief. And actually, the example study that I'll show you, it's just one extra question to the study. Now, the reason I highlight these different designs is that that between-subject design is super dominant, and I think it's actually super wasteful. I didn't used to think this. This is all like stuff I've changed my mind around about recently, just to be clear. So these pre-post or even the quasi-pre-post designs, they have more estimate precision, which means that when you're estimating how that experimental effect, the confidence intervals are smaller, and you're more confident in what that result is, which means you have more statistical power, which means you need fewer participants, which is like fewer time-ranked participants, fewer participants to pay. They can also help us answer some new questions, which I'll talk about at the end of this section. So first of all, this is somebody else, this paper by Clifford et al. I also cite them in the first section, but that's the same author but different paper. This they did this is just math. This is not like nothing in their simulations. But this here is the minimum detectable standardized effects. It's in Cohen's D here. Our post-only design, so that typical between participant design, is this black line. And to get like a small effect of 0.2, which is I think actually most effects are pretty small, you would need about 800 people. It's a lot. 400 in each condition. So at Michigan State, our student sample pool is giant, but this was like, it's 1,000 people. But this means we could run one study essentially a semester, which is not nothing. 1,000 people is great for a student sample pool, but 800 people is a ton of people. If we have a pre-post design where the pre-measure and the post-measure are correlated at 0.6, then you only need 500 people, which is still a lot, but less than 800. And then if they're correlated at 0.75, you need even less, 350 people. And if they're super highly correlated, you can get away with 150 people. Now, not everything is going to be that super highly correlated between the pre and post measure. I think probably most stuff lives in this 0.7, 0.75 range, just for my, this is based on intuition and looking at data a lot, anything else. But you could get it down to use it, instead of 800 people, you get 350 people. And that's essentially, now you can run, for the price of that study, you can run 2, right? And that is really nice.